said, well, that's when I knew with you don't have to go. Oh, no, you don't have to show nobody but me. I said, now only you. Oh, now only you, yeah, can do it to me. You know you do it to me, yeah. Forget the bad times and all the sad times that I had to put you through. And just come to me, 'cause I'll be waiting by the sea. In that place we said we're gonna spend our eternity. I said that you don't have to go. Oh, no, you don't have to show nobody but me. I said now only you. Oh, now only you, yeah, can do it to me. You know you do it to me, yeah. Said now you don't have to go. Oh, no, you don't have to show nobody but me. I said now only you. Oh, now only you, yeah, can do it to me. You know you do it to me, yeah. I said do it to me.
He's a coming down the road, but I paid all I owed. He's prowling at the gate, but it's not my fate. He's a week too late. He howls at the moon. Oh, that old tune gets under the skin of my chinny chin chin, but only you are getting in. I put something aside for you. Come on, darling, see what I've got for you. The wolf is gone, the wolf is gone. Come down home again. I'm better than I was before. We laugh at the rain falling 'cause the wolf's gone from the door. Come down home again, better than I was before. We laugh at the rain falling 'cause the wolf's gone from the door. I'll give you most of what I got, 'cause only half is not a lot. But it's a whole lot more than I ever have
Or get to a screen. Councilmember Harper Madison, good to see you this morning.
Check. Check. That one's not. Just
When our tech guys are ready and set up and ready to broadcast, we'll go ahead and get started.
we're ready now. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and gavel us in on two meetings. We'll run them simultaneously. The first is the City of Austin City Council work session. And the second meeting is the special called meeting to address the water boil situation we just went through, as was requested by Council members Ellis and Harper Madison. I think on behalf of multiple council members that wanted this. Thank you for making that formal request. Today is Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. The time is 9:34. We have a quorum present in this hybrid meeting. One of our members is appearing virtually. 8 others of us on the dais at this point live. We're going to begin, as we talked about on the message board, with the item that was in the special called meeting. And as we laid out, I'm going to ask Councilmember Ellis to open us up. We're going to then give the staff and the manager an opportunity to address this issue. We'll come back up to the dais to articulate questions or issues that the council members want to hear. We'll try to do that so we get kind of the thrust of the questions out. We'll go back to the manager at that point to respond, and then we'll come up for question and answer more specifically for however long it's the will of the council to proceed. Also on our agenda in the work session today, pulled items, but we have none that were filed ahead of time. We do have 2 briefings, the SMBR briefing and the cadet class briefing. We also have an executive session item for us to hit today. I don't know how long this will go this morning. Several of us are going to leave the dais momentarily about 11 o'clock. Mayor Pro Tem, you'll take the helm at that point. I think that we can go and come back relatively quickly. The hope is maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do the SMBR presentation this morning, take a break for lunch, and then noonish hour, do the executive session item, come back for the cadet class briefing right after lunch. Generally is a way to go. Okay?
Sorry, Mayor, I'm trying to absorb the run of show, but would you mind just laying it out again? So right now, we're going to go to the special call.
Correct, and we'll do that until people are finished with that. If there's time before lunch, we'll tee up the SMBR briefing. We'll break for lunch about noonish hour. And during that lunch break, we'll have the executive session on the litigation issue in front of us. We'll come back from lunch at that point and pick up the cadet class briefing.
Thank you.
Okay?
And I think you mentioned several of us are planning to attend.
Yeah, 11 o'clock,
Black
some
History
of us will
Month
step
celebration.
off.
Okay.
And I think that's a Zoom issue, and I think that we'll see where we are, but I told the Mayor Pro Tem maybe she could keep running in that meeting rather than keep running in this meeting rather than recessing it. But let's make sure that we're not in a place that we need everybody here for. All right, so with that, Councilmember Ellis, do you want to frame up our morning for us?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I just want to make some brief remarks to open us up. I will be reading. I usually like to be a little more off the cuff with my statements, but I just know that this past week has meant a lot to people and has affected people in different ways. And I wanted to make sure my remarks were well thought out previously. I called this special called meeting in collaboration with Councilmember Natasha Harper Madison because of the instant feedback we got from the community. Many people were caught off guard because we figured we made it through the freeze only to be surprised by a boil water notice. Austinites deserve a safe, reliable, and resilient water system they can have confidence in, and I'm hopeful this process will achieve that. The goal of this meeting is to address the recent errors that caused this boil notice and to identify what changes need to be implemented so that we are prepared no matter what comes our way. Today is the beginning of many steps the city must take to rebuild that public trust. We are all aware that this latest crisis was a frustrating and preventable event. This one was due to an employee oversight at the Ulrich plant, and I certainly do not want to vilify a handful of employees. We know that our city staff has been through a lot over the past few years. But rather, I'd like us to take a step back and look at the big picture here. Is our workforce the best it can possibly be? Are we training and paying staff effectively? Our frontline workers are responsible for the health and safety of our entire community, and I want to know that their working conditions are safe and supportive because, as we've learned, there are so many known and unknown challenges that may arise. Our biggest challenge, climate change, is going to continue to wreak havoc on our community, and we must be prepared for anything. Last year's winter storm taught us that. The Halloween and Memorial Day floods in the recent past have taught us that. There are any number of catastrophic natural disasters we need to be prepared for, which is why this latest event struck a nerve with so many, in that it doesn't appear to be related to a weather event. In some ways, this past week felt like the last straw for so many people. Our constituents are exhausted. Our city staff is exhausted. The last few years have been some of the most trying times in history, and our city employees have persevered through it all. We've faced so many crises in the recent past that the terms new normal and unprecedented are now cliche. So knowing that, let's get to work on righting the wrongs. Today's meeting is just a first step. Then we'll consider Mayor Pro Tem Allison Alter's external audit resolution on Thursday. And then Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes will take up this issue as she chairs the Austin Water Oversight Committee at their meeting next week. My colleagues, our community, and I have so many questions, and I want to thank city staff for quickly beginning to answer those posted on the message board and through the council Q&A process. That will help us to be more efficient in our work here today. So finally, before we get started, I want to acknowledge Director Greg Mazzaros and the entire Austin Water team. I can only imagine what an impossible week and a half this has been for you after managing through last year's winter storm and the floods before that and wildfires before that. This city has grown dramatically since you took the helm in 2007, the year that I first got to Austin. And since then, you've overseen the Water Forward process, the construction and launch of the Hancock's water treatment plant, and implemented innovative water conservation strategies that many other big cities look to us for guidance on. You have much to be proud of, and I wish you nothing but the best. And as a personal note, I have received calls and text messages about your leadership throughout the years, and we are sad to see you go, but I know this is a really trying time for our community, and I appreciate you being here with us today to help us work through these processes so that we know that Austin Water has what it needs from us as council members, and that we can make sure that your employees know they are supported, and we want to work through these processes together.
Okay, with that, Manager, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and community members. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to address all of you this morning. As you know, the period beginning late Saturday, February 5th, and through late evening of Tuesday, February 8th, was a trying time for all of us. It was trying on our community, on our city organization, and in big and small ways, it impacted each of us personally. During this roughly 72-hour period, our community experienced its third citywide boil water notice in 4 years. And while each of these three events and the circumstances that caused them are unique, we share the community's and the City Council's sentiment that this is simply unacceptable. Our community must have the full faith and trust in its public water system and the leaders charged with overseeing it, and certainly no community should ever be in the position to doubt the safety and reliability of that system. As leaders in this organization, we are the stewards of this public resource. We recognize that this incident has diminished the public's trust, and we take responsibility for that. We also recognize the immense and important responsibility of restoring that public trust. As I have said earlier, nothing is more important to me and to our organization. As a first step in rebuilding that trust, we have provided to City Council and the public important information related to this event. This includes a more detailed timeline of events that transpired, ultimately leading to the decision to initiate a boil water notice, as well as information addressing many of the council's then pending questions. It is our hope that this information might help serve as a basis from which we have today's discussion. But our work is far from over. We still have much to learn from this event, both to understand more deeply what occurred and how to help mitigate any such future event from occurring. The department is currently conducting an administrative investigation into this incident to ensure that there is appropriate accountability, as well as performing an after-action review, which is a standard practice in the wake of such an event. Today, we are before you to address some of this in greater detail, as well as address other remaining questions and concerns you may have. Before I turn this over to Director Mazzaros, however, I want to briefly acknowledge and thank those employees of Austin Water, Homeland Security and Emergency Management, our communications team, and other departments who directly supported the city's efforts to restore normal operations at Ulrich and quickly administer the distribution of potable water and bottled water across our community. I also extend a heartfelt thanks to the many community organizations and other partner agencies who assisted in this massive effort. We showed that no matter what, we will overcome any challenges before us and we'll do it together, and we could not have done that without you. Lastly, I want to acknowledge Greg Mazzaros and the employees of Austin Water directly. For 15 years, Greg has led an organization with a rich history going back over 100 years. Austin Water is a proud and professional organization and among the highest regarded public water utilities in the country. Despite these recent challenges and disappointing setbacks, your Austin Water employees work tirelessly each day to ensure all of us enjoy a safe and reliable water and wastewater system, among the most essential of any city infrastructure. And they will continue to deliver on that expectation and carry out this very critical service no matter what. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director Mazzaros. Greg?
Thank you, City Manager, and thank you, Councilmember Ellis, for your thoughtful words. I just want to kind of frame up today and have some opening statements to go over the event and some of our experiences and observations. Let me say first, anytime we issue a boil water notice, it's because of a heightened risk of safety in the drinking water. And as a water professional representing over 1,300 Austin Water employees, that's unacceptable to us. We never want to be in a position where we're issuing boil water notices and having heightened risk, and we're going to work tirelessly to get us back on a better track. As the city manager and Councilmember Ellis described, sometimes boil water notices are because of catastrophic weather events. That was what happened in 2018 with the Colorado River flood, Winter Storm Uri. Sometimes they're caused by infrastructure failures, a transmission main failure, or something of that sort. But in this particular case, as I've described earlier, this was really about our operations of the plant, how we communicate, how we make decisions, how we respond to alarms, how we escalate. Those are all within our control, and as Councilmember Ellis said, ultimately preventable with this boil water notice. And so that's what's so difficult here. And I am just profoundly sorry that we had this event. I know it was painful and difficult coming on top of all the other events that not only we've had, but the pandemic and everything else that the community's been struggling with. I'm sorry the community suffered. I know this is scary and disruptive and frustrating and tiresome. I'm sorry to my colleagues, all those that pitched in to help launch water distribution and came back to the EOC. I'm sorry for all of that, and we're going to work at Austin Water to do the best we can to see that what is preventable is truly prevented. On Friday, we issued a memo that summarized various Q&A responses that we've received from council members that were on message boards, and so hopefully that's a resource for you. We're continuing our review of this incident. The review of this is highest priority. We're going through a thorough and thoughtful process, but this isn't just a review of infrastructure. This is a review of people and decisions and interviews, and there are certain processes that we need to follow. Councilmember Ellis, I appreciate you speaking about not vilifying employees and jumping to conclusions, that I think it's very important that we work the process in a way that's respectful of all that are involved. I want to make a few statements about my understanding of the circumstances with regards to the operations side. I want to say first that everything that I've seen and read and everyone I've talked to, that there is no evidence of what I would describe gross negligence by our employees. And what I mean by that is nothing where employees were sleeping on duty, where they left the plant, where they were fabricating data. I have seen no evidence of those kind of gross negligent behaviors. Certainly our interview processes are not complete, but in terms of my understanding of all of that and what I've heard and how I've asked people, that is not something that I am seeing or believed happen. There's also a lot of speculation and rumors and gossip when something like this happens, and I want to try to put some of that to bed. There's been several radio callers that have been purportedly Austin Water employees calling into radio stations and giving their opinion of the events. First, I'd ask that you do your best to ignore those, right? There's all kinds of speculation. People can call in and say what they want and represent what they want. I think it's important to let a formal interview and a review process move forward. I will say here, recently, I listened to one of the radio callers, and they made an assertion that this was because of a freeze event and failed valves that froze during the winter storm. I want to say I have seen no evidence that that was what caused this whatsoever. We maintain significant data on our plants in terms of logs and alarms and calls and inquiries and bench dogs and tests and samples. None of that has suggested that this was because of an infrastructure freeze event. I've also reached out immediately during the event. I talked to Rick Coronado, the head of our operations. Rick's been here over 25 years. I talked to Brian Hawes, who's the head of our process engineering and labs and other parts. Brian's been here for well over 20 years, was the process engineer at Ulrich earlier in his career. I spoke to Julie Hollinsworth, our division manager over treatment operations. Julie started as an entry-level operator, became a supervisor, a superintendent of a plant, and now our division manager. I also spoke to Stephanie Sue, our overall water treatment operations manager. Stephanie's with us today. I spoke to the superintendent of the plant on operations, Mulgrew. All of those folks did not in any way indicate that this was a frozen infrastructure problem. And so I want to disabuse that's a belief. I have, again, seen no evidence of that, and we're working this process to document what truly happened. All the data continues to point, as we've communicated in our memo, that this all originated with the starting of what we call Basin 6, one of our treatment basins that we started up at the plant. It's very common for us to start up treatment basins. This is not a new process. The startup of Basin 6 cascaded out of control, spilled over into the filters, and ultimately into the finished water. We'll elaborate that on a little bit more, but that is the path that the data continues to suggest that was the root cause of this event. How we started up and managed Basin 6 and the impacts it had downstream in the plant. And the data tells the story. I'll just summarize very quickly here. On Friday, February 4th at 10 p.m., Basin 6 had been started up. Our turbidities out of Basin 6 were 8.7. Typically, a basin starting up, you would expect that about 5 to 10 turbidities. Tap water, finished tap water turbidities were 0.04 to 0.06, very, very low, well within any requirement. On Saturday, the next morning on the 6th at 2 a.m., 4 hours later, Basin 6 turbidities had risen to 21. Again, you're expecting about 5 to 10. You can see this basin is starting to have some problems. Again, finished water taps are still fine, 0.05 to 0.07. There's a buffer. As you're making new water and it's moving its way through the plant, the old water that you've made is in the reservoirs, you're pumping it out. So as you have a problem inside the plant, it doesn't immediately cause a problem in the taps, what the public is seeing pumped out. And that's good. That gives you a buffer to try to analyze process problems and deal with them before they ultimately translate out to the public. Basin 6 continued to deteriorate again on Saturday, February 6th at 6 a.m., 4 hours later. Basin 6 turbidity readings are now 145, a basin that's totally out of control. Taps are still good, 0.05 to 0.06, but this high turbidity water from Basin 6 is pouring on the filters. The filters are going to ultimately, they're not designed to handle those kind of loads. They're going to start to break through. Higher turbidity water is going to start to get into the reservoir, and ultimately that's going to get pumped out, and the finished water turbidities are going to start to rise. And that's exactly what happened. After 6 a.m., by roughly mid-morning, we had shut down the plant and had issued or had started the process of preparing for and ultimately issuing a boil water notice. So again, the data is all pulling back to Basin 6. And that's really the heart of our investigation and interviews is how did communications break down? Why weren't we able to diagnose what was happening with Basin 6? What remedies were we implementing? When a remedy didn't work, what additional remedies were we turning to? And so all of that decision-making and communications, how are we responding to alarms? As we were recording this data, we continuously monitor the basins as we saw these data rise in the control room, how are we responding to these alarms? As the alarms went into the filter system, how are we responding to the filter alarms? What were we doing or not doing? How was that all happening? How are we escalating? Did we call for help? How did we call for help? When did we call for help? How did we pass down knowledge? We're evaluating all of that, and that's all what we call operations and the decision-making, communication, and responses and escalations that we're doing there. We're not complete with that. We expect to be complete soon. Within a week or two. We're pushing hard, but again, these are people. You're interviewing people. You're documenting. You're writing reports. I'm not doing this. I'm not involved in interviewing. I'm not involved in report writing. This is being done by HR professionals and others, so they can have an objective and good review of the human side of this. So that's kind of where we are with this. Again, there's more elaboration in the memo, and Rick's here. He has a few slides to go through the process. I think I've probably covered some of the process understanding, but Rick can amplify that and certainly also speak to some of the initial preventative measures that we're putting in place given our experience on this event. And I'm happy to answer questions now, or if you'd like to continue with Rick, really at the pleasure of the council, Mayor.
I think we want you to continue to do your presentation, then we're going to come back up to the dais. We'll have a chance to collectively ask questions. We'll go back to you again. But you've had a chance to see some of the questions, so we'll let you go ahead and help frame out your response.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, you don't think this?
No, this
test,
one, this
test.
is the working one.
Yeah. Again, Rick Coronado, Assistant Director for Operations, City Manager, Mayor, Council members. I just kind of would like to kind of add to, I know that you have a slide deck that has some of the details that Greg Mazzaros has gone over. I just want to reinforce, some of the information that you've already been receiving, including the operations of the settled water basin number 6, and that kind of talks about how important it is to have good solids handling that operate the basin itself. We have process control information that not only is instrumentation that's online, but also lab tests that are performed by the operator on a routine basis. All that information has provided us with direction that it was the basin that was upset that ultimately impacted the processes downstream of that. One of the slides that you have regards what happened includes why
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mayor, we don't have the slides yet. If we can have those emailed to us.
They're posted in the backup for the special call.
I think they were posted this morning.
Is it possible to stop the ticking? So. Can only imagine what it's like if you're speaking.
There was just a ticking noise, I think
Is it the mic?
This is the A/B check. I have 2 presentations available, and I will put up what we have in our IT folder, and we'll go from there. And apologies if those are not what you're looking for.
That's not it.
And the presentation, Mayor, was sent out at 8:31 from Katie Powers.
We'll wait for that. We'll look for that. Thank you.
Okay. So let me just kind of talk through, and then I'll reference any questions that you might have related to some of those slides as you receive them. So an important part of the process of starting up a basin, we kind of had that as a requirement for flow increases. The basin that was started had to be seeded. What we call seeding the basin is adding solids. That combined with the chemical addition provides us with a control of operations for that basin. I'll make sure if they mean to continue.
Go ahead.
Okay.
They're asking, do you want them to continue, or are we?
Okay. So I mentioned that there's testing that's performed not only at the basin. The center of the basin is what we call a mixing well, and that helps the operator determine whether or not they're within parameters, control parameters of that basin. They'll take a test. They'll sample for not only pH, turbidity, or in this case, settleable solids. There's a range in which that basin will operate to ensure that it will produce good water. They also provide with tests that exit the basin prior to going to the filters, and all those indications, whether there were alarms that were online and also samples taken, indicated that there was an upset in that basin. Obviously, the next step of the process is also to filter that water. Once that water has exited the basin, it enters into a common pipeline that goes to multiple filters. There's a total of 18 filters at Ulrich Water Treatment Plant, and multiple filters experience that high turbidity water going on top of the filters. Eventually, the filters, they perform well initially, but eventually that breakthrough of those solids went through the filters. The filters then the water exiting the filters go into what we call a clear well. What the clear well is intentionally just a underground storage tank. So that storage tank is our reservoir to pump out to the distribution system. So you will, once those filters receive water and filter that information or that water, there was alarms that were set for the performance of individual filters, as well as low-level alarms, high-level alarms that indicated that there was a problem with those filters. There was no indication that we could not operate any valves related to the filters or any equipment from the top end, which we call the control center, the SCADA control center, that we weren't receiving information. We received all the information that was relevant to the process control of those operations. That water then entered into the groundwater, the storage tank underground, before it was pumped out to the community for about an hour and a half of higher turbidity water that exceeded some of the regulatory standards. We received notification, next slide please. We received notification the next morning that also addressed the assessment of the situation. The plant was shut down immediately. That included also starting to clean up some of the filters. We also needed to meet the demands of the distribution system, so we ramped up both Davis and Hancock's water treatment plant to meet those demands initially. And those plants were operating within all regulatory requirements, including strong disinfection, which Ulrich also experienced strong disinfection throughout this entire process. But that allowed us to keep the demand needs for the community while we were assessing Ulrich Water Treatment Plant. I want to kind of point out, obviously that is our largest plant. Ulrich Water Treatment Plant can only sustain so long being out of water. So we definitely saw the need to pivot to the other water treatment plants to ensure that we were still meeting the demand requirements as well as fire flow protection. Next slide, please. So I want to kind of point out, there are some ongoing actions, some initial actions that are going on. I personally have met with all three plants to ensure that they continue to stay focused with their day in, day out operations. Whether they work day shift, night shift, or if there's support for the entire plant. I've met with the teams from Ulrich Water Treatment Plant, including the management staff, have met with the teams. We've met with the Davis Water Treatment Plant staff as well as the Hancock's Water Treatment Plant staff. One, to ensure that their day in, day out job is very valued in the community, that they produce high quality water every day, and that we want to keep them focused to ensure that they continue to do so, to ensure that they communicate with their coworkers from going from one shift to another. That's the importance of communication, that they address any needs that they may have to escalate, to make that successful for them to operate the plants 24/7. We definitely want to continue to reinforce that encouragement that they're supported by not only their chain of command, but if they need to reach out to me directly to do so. So that is an important message to all the employees for Austin Water, And even through this critical time as we assess some of the needs for the plants, that may include evaluating some additional process control measures that we have within the plants. That may also include some technology needs that might address some more advanced notification or some notifications that are external to the team. We will continue to evaluate the training protocols. I think some of the questions have been around, what does it take to be an operator here at the facility? And so anyone who has to perform process control must have a license from the state of Texas within a year, and they should be, performing that work under a licensed operator. So that is being met with all our facilities, and we'll continue to evaluate that need. There's a lot of training that goes on that's on-the-job training. We have had a workforce that turns over, quite frequently because of the high demands for this skill sets. They are operating a very highly technical facility, and we'll continue to evaluate their training needs. In addition to that, we'll continue to review the alarms, the alarm protocols, the testing protocols, and any notification procedures for improvements. I stand here before you very apologetic that this has happened, but we're going to continue to evaluate and make this a stronger workforce to ensure that they make the right decisions day in, day out, and they're supported by Austin Water and the city day in, day out to ensure that they produce safe drinking water. Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm going to go back to Councilmember Ellis and Councilmember Harper Madison, first two. We're going to stay on the dais here to ask questions. Manager, director, if you take note of the questions that are being asked, we're just going to go down the dais so people can ask questions. You might be able to order them in groups. I'll give you a chance to respond to that first collective questions, and then we'll come up to the dais to ask specific questions in real time. Did you have anything else? I know that you used your opening to ask questions, but I want to give you a chance if you want to say anything else at this point.
I did, and I don't want to hog the microphone because I know everyone's got questions, but did you want me to list them and everyone to kind of say what they're thinking, or how were you imagining?
Well, yeah, I think you've asked the question in your opening. I think you asked those questions, and I think that they heard those questions. If that's what you have at this point, that's great. I would then go to Councilmember Harper Madison if she wants to add any questions for those folks to answer. Councilmember Harper Madison?
Yes, let's let her go.
Oh, honestly, I'd like to hear what my colleagues are thinking. It's not questions so much as I really didn't get the opportunity, prior to the presentation. Once again, I'm too polite for my own good. I didn't holler out before the manager spoke. I really just wanted to echo what Councilmember Ellis said earlier. And I want to highlight that we obviously understand that our city staff, they worked around the clock to mitigate this recent event. And I really appreciate the presentation. I appreciate hearing from Director Mazeros. They continue to work around the clock to figure out exactly what happened, how to prevent it from happening again in the future. But I just want to make sure that I'm clear about recognizing the deep frustration that our constituents feel. I've heard apologies, and I register them. I think you mean it. And I think most people who are thinking about the difficulty of your job, they think you mean it too, but this is compounded by the fact that this event really just echoed the trauma of last year. The resolution that we did, or I'm sorry, the proclamation we did this morning. So I just want to make sure that as we are saying, there's no direct fault, blame, etc., that we're tossing in the direction of city staff. We do want to make sure that we recognize the frustration of our constituents. I have just a couple of questions that are unanswered currently, but I really do want to hear what my colleagues have to say. I just wanted to make sure to recognize that both things can be true. This is complicated, and we appreciate the hard work of city staff. This is complicated. We appreciate the frustration of our constituents. Both things exist at the same time.
Great, thank you. Let's just go down the dais. Councilmember Kitchen, do you have any questions you want to throw in?
First off, I want to say that I echo what Councilmember Ellis has said. I appreciate the work of Director Mersaris. We will miss him, and I want to say thank you for all the work that you've done over the years, including some very innovative efforts. I think that the kinds of questions that you articulated when you spoke is what I'd like to understand, and that boils down to what was the response system, both from the standpoint of the workflow for staff and the technological alerts. So I think that this is an opportunity for us. First off, I think it's very important that this is not an exercise in blaming any of our staff. I think we've all said that. It is an exercise in understanding exactly what happened and where improvements can be made. So the questions that you articulated, Director Mersaris, are the things that I want to understand, and that's the details around the response. So how and who and when, and from a person standpoint, is there any technology that could be added that would help with that response system? So, thank you.
Fuentes?
Thank you. I'd first like to start by thanking Director Greg Mazzaros for his 15 years of service to Austin Water. You have embodied what it means to be a public servant for our community and your service to our utility, and I just want to thank you for your service and your leadership, and I know we owe you a lot of gratitude for that. And I also want to extend my gratitude to the hardworking staff at Austin Water for your hard work during our recent boil water notice. Certainly you responded quickly to get our water back online and made sure that drinking water was available throughout our city. I was able to visit one of the water distribution sites in my district and connect directly with Austin Water staff, and got to be with them as we loaded up cases of water in vehicles. And so I know despite everything that was going on, they were very committed to making sure that our vulnerable community was getting what they needed. And so I just wanted to say thanks first and foremost. Also wanted to highlight, why we're here today, that even with the best intentions, nearly 1 million Austinites and Central Texans were without drinking water for over 72 hours. And unfortunately, too many have lost faith in our utility and the service that we provide. And so we've experienced too many water quality issues over the years to not demand better. And I know many of my colleagues share that sentiment as well. And so I was appreciative of your opening comments, Director, when you shared about really focusing in on the operations, on the decision-making process, on communications and the protocols and procedures we have placed, because certainly that's the lens that I'll be looking at for today's conversation, and really looking to make sure this doesn't happen again. I think in order to get to that, we're going to have to hone in on what are our procedures and decision-making process. And so I appreciate my colleagues for calling this meeting today. And I know as the newly appointed chair of Austin Water Oversight Committee that I'm also committed to that work to ensure that we work closely with our utility over the next 30 days and beyond, because we know that while the next 30 days are critical in understanding what exactly happened, the real work lies ahead in making sure that we're making the necessary adjustments and changes. And so as was laid out before me earlier, we'll be taking a look at the audit that will happen, as well as ensuring that there is a smooth transition. I did want to highlight for the community that during our last Water Oversight Committee meeting, which we had in January, we received an update on the efforts to modernize our power distribution equipment at the Ulrich plant. We talked about the significant infrastructure improvements, such as upgrading control panels, replacing pumps, and changing out motors. And so there's a lot of important work underway at Austin Water, and that critical work that we have in our infrastructure here as a city is important. And that's something that the Austin Water Oversight Committee will continue to have conversations about to understand what exactly we need to hone in on and to ensure that the act and the action part is done and that we hold our system accountable. And so some of the questions that I have to build off what Councilmember Kitchen was sharing is looking at understanding if there is a standard operating procedure that Austin Water has for seeding the filters and what that process is in place or how that process looks like. Also looking at why did the seeding process go so long? Why was it not terminated successfully? Why did the alarms not go off? Were they intentionally disabled? Was it a matter of us not having a system in place where the alarms were activated appropriately when the levels were exceeding the regulatory requirements? Also looking at were there valves that could have been closed to prevent the high turbid water from leaving the plant? So these are just some of the questions that really hones in on this particular incident. And so I hope that we're able to cover those questions today. And then, of course, we'll continue the conversation next week at our Austin Water Oversight Committee meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. And there are a number of questions that I already put on the message board that I know is already out there in an attachment that y'all have provided responses to. So I may ask City Manager if staff can put those in the backup as well, just so people know what questions have already been answered. But I want to make sure when we walk away from this meeting today, we have the answers just about training and oversight, the alarms, as other folks have mentioned. It's my understanding that no one got sick, and the taps that were coming through to people's homes, that this was very preemptive and ensured that there was actually safe drinking water, as people were told to conserve and to boil water, that there was no contaminated water that actually got out to any of the customers. And capacity at the treatment plants and whether our infrastructure can currently hold all the capacity that is needed during events such as this. Any unfunded infrastructure. I know you have multiple years of capital improvements planning in the works, and so I just want to make sure if there's anything council needs to direct funding to, that we understand that. And the last one would be the reporting process to TCEQ. I've heard some folks say it could have been reported earlier, and I've had other folks say you actually got ahead of the game and did it before you needed to, and so I just want to make sure we know how that testing and conversations work with TCEQ to know which end of that it is. And I will leave it there because I know other folks have more questions.
Thank you. Director, I just want to say to you and to the Water Department staff again that it's a department that we're all real proud of in our city. So many awards over time. The advances, the work done not only operationally, but the water forward work in our city. We really do have a department that we can be real proud of, and you have led it for a long period of time and deserve much of the credit for that, and I want to thank you for that service. It's really hard being the guy who is in charge of the department. Because things will always happen that go wrong. I mean, in the nature of things, no operation can ever be perfect. We need to make sure that there's always a sufficient amount of goodwill and faith in reserve to be able to weather those future events when they happen in the community. And we've been obviously star-crossed here in the last 4 or 5 years. Which has impacted kind of that reservoir. But in any event, I want to thank you and the staff who I know have worked tirelessly, and I've been through many of those events with you to know just how hard you and the staff work. I want to say thank you for that. The questions that I'd like you to address for me when it comes back to you would be, I guess, a little bit more detail as well. You started off by urging people to be really careful about the information and data that they use. That there are a lot of people in the community talking about a lot of different things, and it's real hard to know at some point what's true and what's not true. which is why it's important for us to have this meeting here today and the oversight meeting next Tuesday, the conversation we'll have on Thursday at the council meeting. And in the society that we live in today, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between what's true and what's not true. You mentioned in particular the person who called into the KLBJ radio show and was making representations, including that they were one of the people that had been suspended. I'd like you start off by saying you wish people would ignore that call. I'd like you to tell us whether or not you think that was one of the people who got suspended, or whether we had someone calling in who purported to be that and purported to know that information, and when in fact was really not someone that was suspended, because I think it's important for people to know what they're hearing, to be able to evaluate it. The second thing is, I'm still a little confused as to timing. In the reports that you gave us, you said that, and in the outline of the timing you gave us, that the turbidity was detected at the plant at 8 a.m. And I don't know if that's when there was a shift change and another shift came in that saw it and went, oh my goodness, the numbers have been high. Because from what you also said, it sounds as if it was actually detected at about 2 a.m. when the number had gone up to 21 out of the range of the 5 to 10. So that it may have been reported at 8 a.m. up the chain, but it was detected at 2. And I want to know if I'm understanding that correctly. That part of the challenge is that while it was detected at 2, it was not sufficiently reported or acknowledged for what it was until 8. And I want to make sure if I'm understanding it, that the human error that was involved here was that period of time between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. when we started putting in motion, measuring, and then responding to what we saw. That's my first question. The second question concerns the 12 hours after 8 a.m. before we got to the water boil. I think it's really helpful to know that there were no contaminants that we know of that were in the water and in the plant and released out to the public. That's good to know. But we know that, but my understanding is that because of the turbidity, we couldn't be sure of that at the time. And it's because we couldn't be sure of it at the time, because of the turbidity, that we did the water boil. So it seems as if we did the water boil because there could be bacteria in the water. We didn't know. We have no evidence that there was, but we did the water boil because we couldn't know. And the question is, we went from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Was there the potential for bacteria to be released into the drinking water during that period of time, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.? And would the amount of water that was released be of sufficient concentration in our overall system that it would present any real risk to the public? So the question goes to risk. What risk did the public face, if any, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. when it's possible, well, we know now no contaminants were released, but during that period of time when we didn't know, what was the risk, if any, to the public? The last question I have is probably not a question to be answered here, but I just want to log it in. We've had 3 citywide boils in the last 4 years. We've had 2 other water boils that were more contained geographically. And they appear to be really dissimilar events with dissimilar causes. But yet it's a lot to have in a short period of time. So in a question that's going to take more than what you could know now to answer, I think the question I have is there a commonality over the course of those 5 things? Is there something else that's happening that led to even these widely divergent incidents resulting in water boils? Councilmember Tovo.
Thank you. I too want to add, Director Mazzaros, my thanks to you. Serving the public is challenging no matter what role you have, but I think you've had an extraordinarily challenging role here directing our water utility, and you've done so during an unbelievably challenging period for our community. So I appreciate your leadership. As the mayor said, we've had, Austin Water has been an innovator nationally, and under your leadership, we've moved forward with Water Forward and other kinds of really innovative programs. And I've been here long enough to know that you also led us through an extraordinary drought, a drought of record. And so there have been, in the course of your time here at the City of Austin, there have been all kinds of unexpected and really challenging obstacles. And I know, and I see that, and I appreciate your leadership and your work on behalf of the City of Austin. So thank you. And I join others in just wishing you the very best as you take your next path. I also want to thank you and your staff for the way in which you responded. As the mayor said, we're going to encounter unexpected crises and challenges, and it's really how we respond that I think shows the strength of our city. And I appreciate that in those water distribution efforts, you learned from and immediately implemented some of what you had described in the after action report. We had water on hand. The network of water distribution was more organized, more geographically distributed. I mean, I appreciate you and our other city leaders for really responding to that. That is not in any way to ignore what Councilmember Harper Madison said, which is, of course, this is enormously frustrating for many of our Austin residents. We hear that too, and we're all going to work together to make sure that we're figuring out what can be done differently to make sure that we're not facing and we're not in the same place again. So my questions, and I'm trying to siphon out the ones that have already been asked. We've talked a little bit about the caller and some of the assertions that person made. I think you addressed this, Director Mazzaros, but I would appreciate it if you would do so again and a little more clearly. One of the things that I took away from that caller was an assertion that doesn't seem to match any of the information we've received, that weatherization on the plant had failed in some way or was faulty. If you could please address that, which again does not seem to be supported by any of the conversation that we've had or any of the information that you've provided. I think in the subsequent week, we've heard on social media and in other places assertions that the infrastructure is old, faulty, that we as a city have failed to fund it. If you could address that too, and again, do what you, I think, have done throughout this presentation and through all of our information. And again, just very clearly provide your response to that, and again, highlight that it does appear to have been an error in terms of how the staff responded. And then for additional questions. Basin 6, thank you for describing that process. I'm still trying to follow all the ins and outs of the details. If you could tell us how many basins are in the plant and whether or not they can be detached from the rest of the system. I think you've answered that on page 2, but I don't entirely follow all of the details of that answer. I think what you're saying is that you are going to now look at interlock technology preventing high turbidity water from entering the filters. I think that's the answer to that question of whether the basin can be disconnected from the system, but I'd appreciate it if you just focus in on that and tell us whether the system could be changed or upgraded in some way that would cut off the basin, a particular basin, if there are problems detected within it. The same with the linkage among the water treatment plants, and thank you for answering that question, which was one that I had forwarded on the message board. I think that too is something that came up again and again in the public conversation, why if there was a problem at one water treatment plant, why we couldn't just rely on the other two. If you could explain whether that's a system that could change. You've answered this question on page 2 out of 6, and I think in attachment 3 out of 3, that the water, when it leaves the distribution plants, intermingles. What would it take to alter that situation? I believe there may be some utilities where that is not the case. Is that something we want to work toward, and what would it take to get to that place? I'm really not understanding why the alarms did not activate a different response among the staff, and so maybe you could help me understand that. There was a comment, and I'm not sure I'm sorry, I don't remember which of you made the comment that one technology need that you may assess is whether alerts should be external to the team. And so I think what you're saying is that the alerts were all internal to the staff, and for some reason they were not attended to, not heard, not understood, I'm not sure what happened there. If you could explain just really clearly, if there were alarms going off, what happened there? Why weren't they getting the attention they needed? And then there is a paragraph on page 2 that I would appreciate you kind of talking us through. I think it's on page 2. Yes, this is in the attachment. And it is the attachment B, page 2 of 3. Please describe the conditions at Ulrich during the heavy rain and ice. And that answer, I think that answers a lot of the questions that we've been hearing, but it is still a bit technical, I think, for the general audience to follow, at least this general audience member. So if you would kind of talk us through that response a little bit, that would be I'd be really grateful for that. I also want to say, getting a memo like this so quickly after was extraordinarily helpful. And that too, to me, really represents a learning from what we experienced last year. And so in the same way, I really appreciate that by the time we had our after action presentation and the audit, you, Director Mazzaros, could stand up and talk about the things that you had already put in place to really respond to that, to really make sure that we're more resilient and that we're learning from the event. I just want to thank you for this. This is really, it was thorough. It answered the questions that were immediately on people's mind, and it did so in a really timely way. And so thank you for that.
And I want to start with thank yous to Director Mazzaros and staff for so quickly bringing us the report. It made a whole lot of difference, I think, in our understanding of what did and did not happen. The two areas that I'd like to have additional information on go to who that caller was and how that person was purporting to be one of the members of the crew, and not that we have any control over it, but what vetting might have been done to make sure that that person's identity was, that person was who he said he was. So, I'd like to dig down a little bit into what actually happened among the crew members. I also understand with personnel issues that we're very careful on what we do or say before an investigation, but I think the investigation will be really important to understand what happened and whether we need to have additional alarms on top of alarms, watchers of the watchers, if you will, for our systems to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So excellent reporting back to us all. I think we all appreciated that. Thank you, City Manager, for making sure that that happened, and Director Mazzaros for so clearly putting the information together so quickly. And then also the assistance that you gave to the community in helping with getting us back on track. I'm sorry that you're leaving us. I have appreciated the work that you've done quietly and with grace, but I respect your decision and understand why you're making the change. I want to make sure that our staff who remain recognize how important they are to this dais and to our community and to the work that we will continue to do going forward. It's a very strong unit that you have. The Austin Water Utility has a good reputation, and I know that y'all will continue to hold that flag up really high and wave it, because it's really important what you offer and provide to our city. We can't do it without you. So thank you. And that's about all I have.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Good morning. Mr. Mazzaros, like my colleagues, I want to thank you for your service and your contributions over the years. I also want to thank you for recognizing the need our community has to restore, and the need that our city has to restore faith and trust in our utility, and your choosing to retire is going to be helpful to us, even if we are going to need to make a transition in leadership. Also want to recognize our city staff across departments who helped in the process. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, some here now, some later. I've been working on putting together the external audit resolution. And before I talk specifically about the questions, I do want to acknowledge that many of the people that I talked to about how best to proceed acknowledged your approach to transparency and openness and many of the things that you've done as a leader over the years. That being said, I have 4 pages of questions, and I'm not going to ask them all now. I'm going to try to summarize them. I'm really interested in getting a better understanding of the operational system errors of the organization so we can fix them and figure out what resources we need to invest to prevent future water quality and supply failures. Really looking for answers and better understanding. One set of questions has to do with stuff that my colleagues have brought up with respect to, what happened with the alarms and why they were not answered. You seem to be saying that the alarms all went off, but nothing was done. And I don't understand why they were not monitored or detected by other fail-safes. The paragraph that Councilmember Tovo just showed indicates that certain things were not in place that seemed like they should have been in place. So I want to understand if we are following best practices for our manual operations and automation levels, whether we need to update our SCADA system, whether we need standard operating procedure revisions, whether we need to change treatment approaches, whether we need to recommend update to TCEQ regulations. I want to make sure that through this process, we are asking why are we doing what we do in water treatment? And are we asking ourselves if this can be done in a more efficient and more resilient way? I understand that there are short-term, medium-term, and long-term responses, and there's things that are specific to this issue, but the goal is to prevent this from happening again. And if we have learned anything over the last 4 years, it won't happen in exactly the same way. And so we really have to be looking at our systems and how they move forward. I have lots of detailed questions about the automation and whatever. I'm going to spare you those and hear what you have to say, and we can keep asking those. I do need to know, on a broader level, whether we have SCADA or other automation failures that are happening within our treatment plants that may or may not be reported to management. I want to understand some of the choices that were made on Saturday. I understand that we do not compartmentalize our water. However, state rules would have allowed Austin Water to issue a hydraulic model-based boil water notice to just some parts of town that are most likely to have received water from Ulrich. Instead, we had a citywide boil water notice, and I want to understand if you considered smaller areas for the boil water notice, and if not, why not? My understanding is that Ulrich mostly serves South Austin and core downtown, and we could have perhaps run a hydraulic model, distribution model, to predict the zones of impacts of the high turbidity water and therefore reduced the scope of the boil water notice. A lot of other specific questions, but I want to challenge this narrative that all of the boil water notices and the zebra mussels were a function of things that are outside of our control. This narrative that it was a function of the weather, to me, seems problematic. 4 of the 5 water quality supply things, not including the fire retardant, all related to Ulrich. And so we have to be asking if there are things going on in Ulrich. In 2018, we know there were intakes along Lake Austin around Lake Travis whose systems handled the high level of turbidity without needing to do a boil water notice. In 2020, with Storm Uri, that was also a problem at Ulrich. Ultimately, it was obviously started by weather issues and power failures, but we didn't practice the emergency response to be able to switch the emergency generator power on, or at least that's my understanding, and I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong. Zebra mussels was also, as I understand, related to Ulrich. And there's a lot of complicated things, and if I'm missing something, I want to know. But we have to be able to respond to these things. We have to have these systems in place, and the evidence that I have before me suggests we need to do more. And the last thing that I want to raise for this portion, and it is frankly frustrating not to be able to get answers, is have we ever done a third-party review by inviting high-performing U.S. water or other utilities to review our practices to identify areas of needed improvement, such as peers in the American Water Works Association?
Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor. When I was informed about the failure at the Ulrich water treatment plant that would require Austin to undergo another boil water notice, I was frustrated, I was upset, and I was angry. But so were other members of the community. Austinites pay taxes for city services, and as council members, we are tasked with being good stewards of taxpayer money. My hope is that this shared frustration leads to an outcome that will hopefully provide answers to the community and rebuild trust in a utility system that has been broken. We have to do better. Today's discussion is a good first step. We know from history that broken systems can be repaired and that there can be a stronger outcome on the other side. We must dig deeper into this situation to ensure that Austin residents have the resources they need and pay for. After the boil water notice was issued, I went to help at the Kelly Reeves Athletic Complex in District 6 by passing out cases of water. I learned a lot by speaking with families that passed through there, including that our community is resilient. I'd like to take a moment and thank our partners at Williamson County for being there for us as well. One thing is clear, we talked about it this morning also. Austinites come together in times of crisis. We're tough people and we don't back down. I want to echo my colleagues' sentiments about thanking Austin Water staff, including Director Masaros, for their work when times get tough. Colleagues, we are definitely faced with an important challenge following this boil water incident to not let Austinites down, and we have a unique opportunity to live up to our promises and to take responsibility and correct what's going to be corrected. I'm looking forward to future discussions, but here are some of my questions. I'd like to know how the emergency manager with Austin Water Utility works together with the HSEM director. And I'd like to know what steps are in place to prevent a repeat of initial findings during investigations. In preparation for this meeting today, I reviewed all of the after-action reviews from previous incidents at Austin Water. I saw several recommendations related to emergency training. For example, on page 3 of the Winter Storm Uri after-action report, one of the findings was that some of the incident management team staff had not participated in incident command training and had a lack of familiarity with emergency protocols that hindered the overall function of the incident management team. It was said that part of the reason for that not happening was because we were under COVID restrictions. And so I'd like to know what training has been done since that recommendation was made and how we're moving forward. I'd also like to know the status of our Senate Bill 3. We're required to submit documents to TCEQ for approval. It's stated in one of the after-action reviews that it must be submitted by March 1st, 2022. I'd like to know the status of that plan, if it's been submitted, and if council could receive a copy of that. And then finally here, I have one more after this. During previous incidents with Austin Water, it was identified that the utility was not able to communicate directly with tenants who don't have direct billing accounts. I'd like to know during this boil water notice incident how we had outreach to multifamily property management companies, tenant associations, and property managers. And then finally, my last question here is my understanding is that water treatment plant number 4 is only pushing out 50 million gallons of water per day. I'd like to know what it might take to get that elevated to possibly 150 million gallons per day or more. Building capacity is something that we need in case we have another issue at another water treatment plant. And that's all. Thank you.
Councilor Vela.
My colleagues have mostly covered my questions, so I'll keep my remarks brief. Councilmember Alter, I share her sentiments with regard to the natural disasters will happen, floods, freezes, but our response is what we can control as a city, as an institution. And my sense, and I would say that the community sense, is that the response has been subpar, that other water systems have not had the kinds of problems, again, with the flooding and with the freeze. Everybody struggled, but we seem to have struggled a little bit more than other communities have. And that's a major concern for myself and obviously for the citizens, the residents of Austin. The one question that I have that I have not heard brought up is we've received a number of constituent communications regarding credits to bills, regarding refunds, something to that effect. And is there any precedent for some type of billing credit from Austin Water to its customers, as well as statewide? I mean, is there any precedent for any municipal utility to have given some type of credit or refund, something to that effect, to their customers? Again, given that in this situation that there was no kind of natural disaster proximate cause. And again, I would extend this question to the city attorney as well. I don't know if there's any liability, civil liability, class action, anything like that that's possible. Those are concerns that come up from myself, and concerns that I've seen, that we've received through email and through other comments into the office.
All right, Manager, you've got a list of questions.
Did Pete want to say anything?
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Harper-Madison and Councilmember Renteria, if you have anything that you want to add.
I do not. Thank you.
No, Mayor, I don't.
All right.
I have been asked.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Obviously, the detailed notes that we were taking during this so we can try to address as many of these questions as possible is going to be critical. But knowing that this is just the beginning of this conversation, and so has been pointed out later, there are going to be multiple opportunities for this dialogue to continue. So we will do our best to address the ones that have been articulated, knowing that we have more time and opportunity to further address that either in written communication or at future meetings. But I'll turn it over to Director Mazaros.
Thank you, Manager. And I'll get started on some questions. Certainly we'll ask Rick and others to contribute. And, I want to answer as much as we can today. And some of these will be top of mind, right? So please forgive me if I don't nail every single detail down correct. We'll be able to follow up and amplify or address questions that we don't cover today. So let me start. Councilmember Alter, I'll start with you. You asked about, and the mayor asked this too, about commonalities over the last few years. We had gone a very long time without boil water problems, and then we're kind of concentrating now. And we had the Colorado River flood, which was really a water quality upset of the source water. We had Uri. We had this event. We had a zebra mussel taste and odor issue at Ulrich. It wasn't a public health and safety, but it was, a very unpleasant event. And then there were a couple, smaller scale distribution ones that you mentioned. We had the fire department cross-connect their foam truck into our system. And I don't recall if there was another. And in terms of the commonality of that, while they're all distinct, I would say one of the focus areas is strengthening Ulrich. That our Ulrich plant is unique in several ways. One, it is our biggest plant by far. And when Ulrich is wobbly, the system is going to be wobbly. And I think focusing on Ulrich is critical. We, Austin Water, we identified Ulrich as a focal point a couple years ago, at least, and have really been trying to focus on strengthening Ulrich. And not just strengthening infrastructure. I think it is fundamentally also strengthening the culture and the workforce and the training across the board. And not just Ulrich. I mean, there's other parts, but I think Ulrich is really, really critical to stay locked in on. And not only is it our biggest plant, but it is uniquely situated with regards to our our distribution and transmission system. That it isn't just the water you have at your plants, it's how you can move it around the system. And Ulrich has really some of the largest lines. It's uniquely positioned to serve south of the river. The other plants don't have the same capability. While they can supplement south of the river, Ulrich is really, just the way the distribution and transmission system is set up, really the key plant for that, and why it can't be out of service for long before we start to get anxious. And so I think that is a commonality. Is between all of that, is our Ulrich plant has been struggling the most, and we've been putting a lot of energy into it in terms of new staff and new management and additional management, but we're not there yet. And I think that has to continue. And I would say staffing in general is something we need to strengthen. We have been experiencing enormous turnover at Austin Water. Just one example here, vivid the last month. In January, 20 employees left Austin Water. That's the most we've ever had leave in 1 month. And our experience is being diluted. We used to turn around, you have, a lot of operators that have 20 years experience, 25 years experience. Those days are gone, right? I mean, we just are seeing a persistent turnover. You're experiencing the withering effects of this pandemic is a part of all of this too. And so focusing on staff, on culture, and on Ulrich in particular, I think is if I'm departing, I am departing, that would be my recommendation to everybody, including my own team. And I think we've been clear about that focus. I would. There was questions about the caller. Several of you had questions about the caller, and I'll do my best to address that. And the caller that called in, there were two callers to LBJ to KLBJ radio, and the latest one identified himself as Lawrence, and he said he was one of the employees that was suspended. Well, of the 3 employees suspended, none of them are named Lawrence, so I don't know why you would call in and say you're one of the employees, but you give a different name. And I didn't do voice analysis or anything like that, but from what he said, it's inconsistent with anything that we've been hearing from this event. And it was quite a weaving in and out narrative, and I don't believe it was one of those employees. That's my own personal belief, Rick. I don't know if you have a differing opinion. It may be an Austin Water employee. I mean, I don't know that, but I don't think it was one of the employees on the shift or but Rick, any?
Yeah, I don't have anything to suggest that even the information that was I don't have anything to suggest that even the information that was relevant to, they talked about filter valves not functioning, and the control system, from what I gathered, was fully functional. You could turn off filters. So I think that in itself was not even consistent with what we've been collecting so far.
But we'll press on that more specifically in terms of documentation and the interviews and the questions and really put that to bed one way or another. But that's my belief in terms of that process. There were some questions about. Hang on a second. There were questions about the integration of our plants and system and why we could have or chose not to do a more limited in scope boil water notice. I don't remember who asked that. There were several maybe that asked that, and I'll address that. So our system is interlinked. We have 3 primary large-scale drinking water plants. Ulrich is our largest. Davis is next, and Hancock's, or previously called Plant 4, is our third and newest plant. Ulrich was originally built it started in the 60s, was expanded many times. Davis was built in the 50s and expanded several times, and then Hancock's went into service in 2014. They all are interlinked. Okay, am I working? There we go. Okay. So our system is interlinked. The 3 plants all produce water that moves into our system and can be distributed about our system. There are some, as I described, some plants are better suited to serve different parts of the system, but we can move water about. And that's an overall strength. That is by design that is done. That allows multiple points of redundancy and resiliency, both within the plants, the ability to move water from different plants to different parts of the system, which is exactly what we did when we had to stop Ulrich, is we compensated as best we could from the other plants and moving water across the system. It also is redundancy within the distribution system. If you have a transmission main system problem or you have to isolate a transmission main because you're relocating it for a mobility project, this gives you the ability to move water in and around your system with parts of it out of service. I think that is a strength, and we should be thankful that we have that ability. Although, it does play a role when we have a plant have an upset. So with regards to how we work that with this plant is as Ulrich had the upset and we were making determinations on with TCEQ on a boil water notice and engaged on sharing data and working through those processes, we did evaluate whether or not we should do a more limited scope boil water notice. And we did that in consultation with TCEQ. We determined that Ulrich serves south of the river, the central zone. It does produce water that goes up to the East Austin pumping station, which can pick up Ulrich water and pump it into the north system. It's not as much water going up that way, but it is possible that water could get up that way. Ulrich water probably doesn't get all the way up to the far northwest, but in talking with TCEQ, the process to document for them all the valve settings in our distribution system, to run a hydraulic model, that has the age of water analysis, that would take many hours of work and would not guarantee that TCEQ would support a more narrow scoped boil water notice. At a minimum, we knew it was going to be at least 2/3 of the city at a minimum. And you're balancing this desire to get the facts right and understand what happened and work with TCEQ and configure your boil water notice and line up to notify the public with the time. I mean, many of you brought up the time. You don't want to wait too long to issue the boil water notice. You want to be thoughtful in your decision making, but regulatory wise, and that's our Bible is regulations, it's at least 24 hours. You must do it in 24 hours, ideally sooner. And so that was the interplay. And I'll say, I made the decision. I said, let's do a citywide boil water notice. That's the most protective of the whole city. It's going to allow us to do it in the most reasonable time without further delay. And I made that decision, and that's what we did. Again, I don't know what would have happened at TCEQ. I know it would have taken more time, and I think certainly we would have had a major boil water notice, but maybe a quarter of our system wouldn't have done it. But I made the best decision based on the knowledge and judgment that I had. And in that same vein, there was a series of questions about how long does it take? Why did you wait 12 hours? What risk were you balancing? And so as you work through an event like this, again, we go to the regulations. The regulations specify 24 hours. Those regulations are based on, public safety considerations. You want to make a good decision with regards to boil water notices. In the beginning, when this was first happening and as we were mobilizing in, there was a lot of, just verifying, making sure that, did the SCADA system have a flaw? Was it hacked in some way? Let's make sure that it's not that. Let's take more hard readings and hard samples and make sure that those are showing the same data that the monitors are showing. You're reviewing the regulations. I consulted with our engineering staff, with our regulations experts who used to work at TCEQ and asked them for their guidance, and not just me personally. The collective team that was helping to manage this event. They advised that in this case, they would recommend a significant consultation with TCEQ and to share data on the event. Because this was process water, internal process water, that had been seeded into this basin and had gone through considerable disinfection, more disinfection than you would normally have water go through just because of the nature of the process, there was some sense that this may have been characterized as a treatment technique violation as opposed to a boil water violation. A treatment tech violation requires public notice, but in writing, it does not require a boil water notice. TCEQ reviewed that data and ultimately determined that the regulations did not allow that. And let me say publicly, and we said this in our Q&A, TCEQ worked tirelessly here. They're under a lot of pressure. I know they even got frustrated with some of our communications, and it's a Saturday. Their world's flipped upside down, and I just say that they were professional throughout this, demanding, exacting, as you would expect regulatory agencies to do, and so I just want to note that. But we worked through that process. We consulted with them. We reviewed whether or not this was a process technique violation, whether it was a boil water notice. They went back. They said, no, this is a boil water notice. Then we started talking about, should we limit it? How would that work? What would you need from us for that to happen? And we worked through that process, certainly, notified the manager. We got ready at HESUM. We reached out to elected officials. We queued up for communicating this, both through our portal and through Warren Township Sexus, and ultimately issued the boil water notice. I think it was at 7:30 that evening, well within the parameters of all the regulations. As I indicated, every boil water notice is you're doing it because there's a heightened risk. And so I don't want to minimize this risk. I do want to emphasize, though, that our disinfection systems remained well above minimum standards throughout this event. That our other plants, and even Ulrich up until up to the last few hours, was producing very high quality water. We felt pretty confident that we could manage this event, but that's where we ended up there. The risk you're managing in a turbidity event is really there's two barriers in treatment that you're managing. One is disinfection systems, where you apply various forms of disinfection. We use chlorine at our plants to kill harmful microorganisms. The other is turbidity, and that applies particularly to surface water utilities. Groundwater utilities are not as subject as much to turbidity upsets and regulations. You're really, by having very low turbidity, very low cloudiness, that's another way to reduce risk of microorganisms that could be harmful. Certain microorganisms can be resistant to chlorine, and so you can use turbidity to make sure that you're minimizing the risk of those microorganisms being in the system. There's really nothing for them to cling to or to hide to. These ultra high or high standards for low turbidity help manage that risk. We're fortunate. Our source water typically falls in a very low risk for those type of microorganisms, but it's not a zero risk. And so that's why turbidity is really important, is that's another way for surface water utilities to manage harmful risk from microorganisms. It's not the particle itself that's risky, it's the microorganism, something that could, give you gastronal distress or a problem. That's really what you're managing with turbidity. Let's see. There was a series of questions about alarms, and we're still working through, documenting all of that process. And Rick, I'm probably going to need your help here, but our plants all have SCADA systems. Each plant has a control room. The control room shows you the status of the plant in terms of pumping and turbidities, and there's alarms, and alarms are set for different standards. We even have sometimes high alarms and high alarms to indicate kind of escalating. To the best of all of my knowledge, our alarms were working. during that system, and they were being acknowledged, but the decision-making for that was where it was breaking down. I don't fully understand that now. I think that's things that we're still investigating. As this situation intensified, during the night, there was not a call for help from outside of the staff that were operating that. I don't entirely know why. They felt that they had it handled. That is the kind of things that we're going to have to continue to examine and ultimately strengthen. I know, Rick, would you like to speak to that more?
I'll add to, in addition to the alarms, I think I mentioned this, the SCADA control system, kind of the monitoring and controls software that picks up different devices, operational statuses for equipment, were all functioning. I think there was some reference that I made also that this is all internal controls monitoring within the plant. There are some technologies that are available that we're exploring. One is to remote into the plant to kind of, if someone reached out for assistance from one of our supervisors or maybe another monitoring location that we have, that would be available to us, and we're exploring to get those. And we've actually received access to some of our supervisor staff, so that way they can monitor the system itself. They can't control it remotely, but they can monitor the same views that the operators are having. We talked about alarms a little bit. There are multiple level alarms, and they have both visual and audible alarm sets. We're looking at whether or not they continue to be alarming, or if once they were acknowledged, those audibles went away, but they're still a visual. So we'll explore, whether or not there's some technology or programming that can be done within the system to ensure that there's more oversight or maybe even tighter controls. That includes even shutting down portions of the process units, not necessarily the basins, but maybe at least the filters. So we're exploring that to see whether or not there's something we can mimic from the other plants, especially our newest plant, our Hancock's water treatment plant, whether or not we can have similar controls to that. And so that, to me, in addition to the alarm settings, reviewing and having oversight of access to the systems, are all those that are immediate actions that we're undertaking.
There, I think there were questions like, could you have isolated Basin 6? Yes. You could have turned off Basin 6 or isolated it from the filters. You can isolate individual filters. You can isolate those from the control room. You just press a button. It's not like you have to go and physically take 2 or 3 hours to turn those off. We don't entirely understand why some of that wasn't done, or at least why there wasn't more of a call for help, why that plant staff shift thought they could handle it on their own. I think there's other things in terms of alarms and knowledge. When shifts change, we run 12-hour shifts from 7 to 7. So you have a shift from 7 to 7, and then 7 in the morning to 7 at night, and that just continues. I think there were misunderstandings or breakdowns or a need to improve what we call the pass-down process, how one shift passes down data and information to another. I think that's a part of our reviews. So a lot of work in this arena that we have to do. Strengthening SOPs, somebody mentioned that. I think that is a part of this. And sometimes, you get kind of complacent in your SOPs. One of our lead operators on this shift, a senior, he had been with us 10 years, a B-licensed individual. And sometimes, you assume people understand things or know things. And, I think we have to revisit those assumptions. Things that worked for the last 10 or 20 years, sometimes break down, and we have to examine those. There were questions that some of you had about I guess it was funding and infrastructure. And let me say that in my 15 years as director, whenever we have proposed a rate increase or a need to fund a project, we might get a lot of questions from the council and the community, and we work through those processes. But in the end, we got the support we needed. this wasn't because we didn't get funding from the council or along the way. I just want to be clear. We have a very robust capital improvement planning process. We need to modernize our plants. We need to stay up with those things. There's a lot of need in our utility, and there's growing risk from a lot of different threats. Our capital program is expanding. It's going to expand, and that will continue into the future. But I have never experienced that the system was starved for funding. Now, we've gone through a period where we haven't raised rates for several years. After a period of raising rates every year, we're re-entering rate increase periods where we're going to need to engage with the council on our rate planning and all that goes with that. The council had requested during our last rate increase that we go through what our full independent hearing examiner processes, where you kind of simulate a Texas public utility process for raising rates. That's very complicated and time consuming and expensive to do. And I think that, my advice as the departing director would be maybe you should re-examine that. And maybe there's an opportunity for us to tackle some rates in a way that doesn't cost us several $1 million in 2 or 3 years of time to do that. And I would ask that you maybe reconsider that direction. It would be one of the requests that I would have to allow our team a little easier pathway to engage with you on rates and discussions and how that's connected to capital and staffing and climate. I think that would be a recommendation I would have for you. We had questions. Councilmember, you had a question about credits, and I will say that I talked to my chief financial officer, Joseph Gonzalez. I talked to the manager. We are evaluating how we could give a credit to customers for this event. We know customers not only all the upset, but they maybe used more water to flush their pipes, and there's, I think, an opportunity for us to acknowledge that and give a credit to customers. Roughly a credit, a 2,000 gallon credit, for us would be very, I think, manageable or something of that. We haven't formulated the final recommendation to the manager, but that is something that I've asked Joseph and his team to work on and to engage with Spencer and then come back to the council. I think we would require your approval for that. And so we would come back and hopefully be able to attend to that in the weeks and months ahead. There were a series of questions about our training for Homeland Security Management and Incident Command training. And I'm going to call on Anna. Anna, would you mind if I asked you to help me with this one?
Good morning, council members. I'm Anna Bryan Borja, Assistant Director of Business Services at Austin Water. Councilmember Kelly, thank you for your questions about our FEMA training program at Austin Water. We do require our staff to take both online FEMA courses and in-person FEMA courses. We have 2 staff members who are certified FEMA trainers who deliver those in-person classes to our staff. When we deliver those classes, we also open them to the community, and staff from other organizations in the city of Austin or in the community are able to register for those classes through preparingtexas.org. In response to your specific question about the COVID impacts, yes, we did have to pause those in-person incident command system training courses during COVID. In November of 2021, we resumed the in-person training classes. We offered Incident Command System 300, which is the intermediate course. We offered it in November and December. We have scheduled another instance of that class coming up in July of this year, and we will be offering the ICS 400, which is the Advanced Incident Command System, internally to our department leadership in April of this year. I could provide more information about our training program, but is that sufficient? Okay. I would also like to respond to your question about how our emergency manager at Austin Water interacts with the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Director. We do have a manager of emergency management who oversees a staff of 5 employees who are dedicated to emergency management at Austin Water. Our emergency manager serves as Austin Water's single point of contact to HESM. That person attends regular meetings with HESM. I believe that is a monthly coordination meeting, and that is a longstanding practice for us to interact with HESM in that way. You also know from earlier presentations to council that in this budget fiscal year, we have added a new position. It is our Emergency Plans Officer Senior, part of our emergency management team. That position will be co-located at HESM 2 days per week and will be a shared resource to help both Austin Water and Homeland Security and Emergency Management continue to enhance our bonds of collaboration as we work together. That position is very near the end of the hiring process. I've recently approved some paperwork and decision-making related to that position. Does that answer your questions about emergency management? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. A few other questions that came up. Councilmember Kelly, you also asked about Senate Bill 3 submittal and what is called the EPP, or Emergency Preparedness Plan. That was a part of a recent law after Uri requiring water utilities to do several things. One, notify all their power providers which facilities they have that are critical. And we have done that. That was done in November. And while AE is our primary provider, we have other providers also that we do, like Blue Bonnet and Perdalis, and we've taken that step. The other is a submittal to TCQ documenting and substantiating how our system is set up to provide reliable power during an emergency. And we're in the process of finalizing that. The due date is March 1st, and we were on course for that to happen. And I'm assuming we're still on course. Some of the same folks that were working on that also help us with the boil water notice, but I have not heard that I believe they're still on schedule for that submittal. And we will certainly provide you that submittal, but there's a lot of sensitive information in that on critical infrastructure and how it's set up and how it's powered. And so we would need to do that in a way that is, thoughtful in terms of risk. So, but we will certainly do that. There is an option in the law to request an extension of 90 days on your submittal. And again, I don't anticipate us exercising that option, but if somehow we fell behind with this, it might be an option that we might need a slight extension, but I don't think so. It would be my sense of it. There was a question about tenants and how we work with tenants here, and we did have a special mailer to tenants as a part of our communications. That was one of the things we identified in our previous after actions, and we did work with AE on the tenant communications. Randy, I have that correct, don't I? Yes. So we did do that, and we can follow up more on what we did there. I think Councilmember Alter had a question about peer review, and we have done peer reviews. We have been a member of the Partnership for Safe Water. The Partnership for Safe Water is a group of utilities and regulators and professional organizations that encourage surface water utilities, particularly with regard to turbidity, to go beyond just the minimum regulatory requirements. And we've been a long-term partner, I think maybe even a founding partner of that from the 90s. There's a series of levels of partnership that you go through, and it's a very data-intensive process that you submit. There's peer reviews, there's analysis of that. We have gone through that, and actually our Ulrich plant had been one of the highest certified plants of its size in the nation. I think we've probably not been as active in the partnership the last few years as we can be, and I think that is something to renew again with our commitments there. We've had Brian Hawes, who I mentioned, has served as an officer of the Partnership for Safe Water. He's done peer reviews of other utilities and their data, and he's very knowledgeable. But I certainly, Rick, I would ask that you speak to Brian and others, and that we renew that commitment again on Partnership for Safe Water. And council member, in addition to the audit processes that you would do. So we do take drinking water safety seriously, and particularly turbidity, and I just but we will come back to those. I think I probably touched on a good part of those questions. Certainly we'll follow up.
Thank you, Director. And I think as the mayor was describing, trying to get at this first round, and then if there's additional questions that were triggered by some of the comments that were made by Director Mazaros or others, we can go through another line of questioning, or we can just, we're here to answer additional questions as desired.
Manager, I do want to thank the council for all the comments. It meant a lot.
Councilmember Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor. You have impeccable timing. We were just looking at each other to figure out the next steps. Thank you for that thorough rundown. I know there's a lot of questions that not only are being asked today, but will also be asked and answered moving forward. I trust in, as we weigh the Mayor Pro Tem's external audit resolution later this week, that the conversation will be in good hands as it continues, and we'll also continue with the Water Oversight Committee that my colleague, Chair Vanessa Fuentes, is chairing right now. And so I know that we're going to stay in communication with the water utility. I was just thinking that y'all are always so good when we have a question, and my office has the simplest question, that both you and Austin Energy bring like 10 or 12 people to the meeting. You want to make sure the questions get answered. We have an opportunity to daylight those. But I think what's really important here is, we all understand the frustration in the community. We know a lot of what happened here is triggering from the winter storm. We just had the lovely proclamation issued this morning with the community involvement. Everybody has their own story about what happened last year. And so I think that's why this was so triggering, was that everybody was bracing for the storm and then turned around and said, okay, we're in the clear now. And all of a sudden got, surprised by the boil water notice. I know that it was done in a way that was very calculated and calibrated and was done with a lot of thought and care. So I know that we don't have every single answer to what took place. We know that you're going to be looking at those training and oversight and alarm systems and reporting systems moving forward to make sure that we can continue to be a leader in clean water and water conservation in a place like Central Texas, where it is of the utmost importance. But to also understand there may be some folks out there that are trying to spread misinformation, and they want you to distrust our processes as a city. And it's incredibly unfortunate that someone may have potentially impersonated an Austin Water employee. Maybe that's not the case, but that could be an option that we're looking at. And I think that's incredibly damaging to the reputation of the city. You certainly cannot impersonate a police officer without repercussions. And I want people to be on the lookout that there might be folks out there willfully trying to spread misinformation and saying this is a lack of funding and infrastructure capabilities, which we've been able to see here is not necessarily the case. There are things that need to be looked at, that need to be resolved. But this is not, this particular issue is not a matter of crumbling infrastructure and underfunding. So with that, I will pass it back to the mayor. I know we have other work to get through today, but I appreciate your time.
So colleagues, let's talk for just a second about what we want to do. It's 11:30 right now. I'm sure that we all have 4 pages of questions we want to ask, and we could either stay with this and continue to work with this. We could go to a briefing. I know there's going to be more discussion on Thursday and at the Water Committee meeting, but we want to do whatever it is that is the desire of the council. So let's just take a second here and talk about what it is that we want to have happen next. Okay? Councilmember Kitchen and Councilmember Tovo.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that's the question for us right now. I appreciate that. From my perspective, I again want to thank Director Merzaros and all of your staff and the city manager for the information that you've provided today. I think that this is, you've provided a lot of information for us, and I appreciate that. So from my perspective, I would like to provide some time for staff to perhaps put some of this in writing in response to what people have asked. I know we'll have an opportunity to talk more on Thursday. I think that what's been presented to us at this point is sufficient. The only last question I would have is, and I think you're getting to this, Mayor, which is our next steps. We know a next step is we have more conversation on Thursday. We know a next step is the Water Committee next week. We know a next step is the investigation that you all are in the process of doing right now. And we appreciate the next steps that you've given us today, verbally, with all the response to questions, and I know that'll be in writing. So from my perspective, you asked where we were. I think it's time that we move on to what else we have to do.
Okay. Councilmember Tovo?
Yeah, I don't mean to be contrarian, but I actually was going to ask that we continue this maybe for another 30 minutes or 45 minutes before breaking for lunch, since we have so many staff from the Austin Water Utility here prepared to answer questions. We've asked questions, and I think there's still some more really useful conversation that could happen that I believe staff have answers to right away. And so I would suggest that we continue this a bit further here today.
Colleagues, other views? Councilor Pohl?
I'd like to give our staff an opportunity to take a break and then also to look at the questions that they weren't able to answer for time constraints or just because there were so many, have an opportunity to gather their thoughts and maybe commit some of the answers to writing and get us another report, and we will have more opportunities to engage directly. And also, all of us will have had time to kind of think through things and absorb the information that we've already gotten and go back and analyze what we've received so far, because I think many of the questions may also be, if only partially answered, in the information that we've already gotten. And I would like to move forward with the briefing and then the other work that we have ahead of us today, rather than
Kelly?
Continuing with this.
Okay. Councilor Kelly?
Thank you. I, too, think that staff should take a break. They've given us a lot of information to digest, and I'm very appreciative of their time today. Thanks.
All right, it seemed to me that most of the people on the dais were shaking their head that they were ready to take a break at this point. Councilor Tovo.
I guess if that's the majority decision, then that's fine. I guess I would ask my colleagues to think about whether we're really asking our water utility to provide additional written answers, or if we could have the conversation first on Thursday. It just, knowing the way this process works, it just takes a lot of time to prepare written answers that are, and then in multiple levels of review and whatnot, and they may actually prefer answering some additional questions on Thursday verbally prior to preparing yet another written memo. Though that might be a good step after that. It's just a very short turnaround time from here to Thursday.
I agree with you too, and I think it's going to come up on Thursday. Is it reasonable for us, today is Tuesday, to ask people to submit written questions so that we can at least get the questions out, and then we can have on Thursday the staff respond? They don't have to write something up. They could just come in with that list of questions, but they would have them ahead of time, and we could just go straight into the answers. Does that work? And I think that might be a compromise between these two places. Councilor Fuentes?
Mayor, that works, and I just wanted to highlight that we do have the Austin Water Oversight Committee meeting happening next week on Wednesday, which will be another at least 2 hours for us to continue the conversation.
All right, then maybe we put a time cap on what we're going to do on Thursday so it doesn't swallow the entire day. Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with the sentiment that my colleagues have shared, including Councilmember Tovo's point about there potentially needing to be further conversation. I like the idea of us putting our questions out and offering staff the opportunity to review them and not have to answer off the cuff. I don't think that's as efficient as it could be, but I do appreciate that a lot of our constituents aren't going to take the opportunity to, or don't have rather, the opportunity to read, pages and pages of information and might want to hear the conversation. I would also like to say, and I don't know that this is something that we've considered, while I can appreciate their professionalism, from what I've heard about the director we're losing, he's the best there is. And I've heard from multiple parties, he's the best director that the city of Austin has, and it's a damn shame we're losing him. And so I think to some degree, we need to offer, the opportunity for staff to really just let that sink in, that there's going to be a leadership change. And I can imagine that has an effect on people. So aside from, not believing that answering off the cuff is the appropriate path forward, I do think it's appropriate for us to offer staff the opportunity to really just kind of go through this process. I think it's probably disheartening for a lot of them.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I would appreciate some answers in writing. I think it's helpful for the future work, and whether they're answered by Thursday or the Austin Water Committee meeting, or they're, in the appropriate time. We may take a little while for some of the answers. I would like some answers in writing. I think it is part of the openness and transparency that needs to happen. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding for Thursday, this would then be kind of pulling my item 60 and having this conversation under that as the opportunity to have the discussion on Thursday.
I think so. And I think, Manager, you're going to do an after-action report on this, so there's going to be a written report. And I would urge in the after-action report that you include all the questions asked by the council in this meeting and in the next meeting. On Thursday, colleagues, let's limit the discussion to no more than an hour. On Thursday, with additional questions, let's get people to post questions on the board between now and Thursday. And basically, we'll just ask staff to respond to the posted questions. And that way they have the questions ahead of time, and we might be more limited, but we won't go longer than an hour on Thursday, recognizing we can pick up next week. Councilmember Renteria?
Yes, and I also would like an answer on what was mentioning that a lot of the employees were leaving, have left the water department, and that's kind of concerning because I want to know what we're going to need to retain our employees, and whether is it going to be where we're going to have a wage increase, and whether we're going to have a rate increase, which is kind of, if we give a discount, is it really going to affect our operation here? And then turn around and we're going to have to increase a higher rate to make up for that. So those are the kind of questions I would like answered.
Helpful. If you could go ahead and Councilmember Renteria, make sure you post that on the message board so that it's written down, and then it'll be in the queue to be answered. All right, colleagues, I would propose we go from here to the Inclusive Working Group SMBR report. We'll do that, see if we can break for lunch right at the end of that, hit the executive session, come back this afternoon for the cadet class briefing. You ready? Director, thank you very much for being with us, staff, manager, and again, thank you for your service to the city. Some of the most important advancements we've made as a city in water have happened during your tenure. Thank you. All right, Manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Our next presentation is in accordance with your adopted resolution from March 2020, and we have scheduled this briefing as an update from the Inclusive Procurement Working Group, which was created by that resolution. This is the first of several planned updates to Council from the working group. The task of the working group is to review and assess programmatic and administrative issues relating to the city's minority and women-owned business enterprise ordinances and to provide recommendations for improvement. The working group includes community representatives and is supported by the Small and Minority Business Resource Department, which is led by Director Edward Campos. Accompanying Director Campos today are two working group representatives, Cleedle Haynes and Gino Macias. And now I'll hand it over to Director Campos, who will begin today's briefing. Director.
Manager, if I may real quick, just so nobody else makes the mistake, I believe it's pronounced Clotilde.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Dr. Campos.
Thank you, Spencer. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor, City Council members, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for having us today. We are making the first of several updates on the work of the Inclusive Procurement Working Group. You'll hear me say working group quite a bit, since Inclusive Procurement Working Group is quite a mouthful. Next slide, please. I am joined, as Mr. Cronk mentioned, with two of our representatives of the working group. Clotilde Davis-Haynes, representing the Austin Area Black Contractors Association, and Gino Macias with the Austin Minority and Women Alliance. We're here to address any questions you may have after our presentation. Next slide, please. Should be on slide number 3. Thank you. We're going to be discussing a brief overview of the resolution, the working group members, including community members and city staff, as well as the progress that we've made to date, and then next steps. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the resolution, there were 11 areas of importance that Council wanted the working group to review, discuss, and make potential recommendations for improvements to the program. We put them into 4 different buckets: certification, resources to our MBEs and WBEs and local businesses, communication and transparency, and then best practices. We also have included a separate bucket for the disparity study. The working group members will receive a comprehensive overview from our disparity study consultant on the findings of the study, as well as review the recommendations and come back to council with a comprehensive report on the recommendations related to